Hello, everyone, and welcome to Out of Nowhere. Whoa, it's a while since Chad's been on the show. I think it's about 2 years. My guest today is Chad Lewis. For over 25 years, Chad has travelled the back roads of the world in search of the strange and the unusual, from tracking vampires in Transylvania and searching for the elusive monsters of the Loch Ness and trailing the dangerous Tate Duende through remote villages of Belize and searching for ghosts in Ireland, haunted castles. Chad has scoured the earth in search of the paranormal. Chad has featured on the Discovery Channel's The Haunting, the William Shatner's Weird or What, ABC's Scariest Places on Earth, and Monsters and Mysteries in America. Can we please welcome Chad to the show? Hello there.
Hey, greetings from the back roads of Wisconsin.
I like that. I like that. What first drew you personally to the Wendigo, and why did you deserve a full book?
Well, the legend of the Wendigo was always present here in the Great Lakes region of the United States. Growing up, you'd hear stories, but when I started studying psychology, I was learning about Wendigo psychosis, the belief that it's a mental illness of people believing they're a Wendigo creature. And I happened to be working on a book about Minnesota ghosts, and I was up in their North Woods, and they have a long history of a Wendigo sighting up there. So I started compiling these Wendigo stories, and over a couple decades working with a colleague of mine, Kevin Nelson, we started combining all these Wendigo legends and folklore from our travels through the Great Lakes, but also throughout Canada. And eventually we had enough where we said, we have to do a book on this. Every other book that's been done about it comes from the academic side, where they're looking at the Wendigo as a metaphor of, the white man's encroachment on indigenous cultures, or the indigenous woman's place in the tribe, and so on and so forth. So we said there's nothing out there that puts it in the supernatural realm or the paranormal. We need to put something out.
For listeners out there what's unfamiliar with the Wendigo, how would you describe it in its original culture context, not the Hollywood version?
Yeah, very difficult question because, well, the Wendigo started with the indigenous First Nations people of Canada, and then it quickly spread through their country and through the US as well, the northern Great Lakes region. And it's old, it's very old. Many of the cultures don't even know the origin because it's always been there. And for me, the Wendigo is perhaps the scariest thing out there because during times of cold winter, when food was scarce and game was nowhere to be found, you were at your weakest mentally, physically, spiritually. Yeah. The Wendigo, when you were starving, you might even resort to cannibalism. And the Wendigo could show up in several forms. It could be flesh and blood, like a bear or a moose looking, but it was 8 feet tall or as big as it wanted to be. It was thin, skeletal, emaciated. Sometimes it had tufts of hair or fur on it, but it could also show up in a spirit-like form and possess you and slowly turn you into a Wendigo as well. So it could come as both physical and non-physical, which for me made it even scarier than if it was just some physical beast out in the woods.
What are some common misconceptions about the Wendigo that modern pop culture gets wrong?
I think several things, and maybe they're not getting it wrong. Maybe the Wendigo has changed over the last 400 years or so that we know of it. But one big thing that stands out is the early literature of the Wendigo will often describe it, and I've not run across any descriptions where it has antlers or horns. Now, today, if you Google the Wendigo, you'll find almost every depiction has giant elk-like antlers or some type of horns. But the original literature never included that. So about the 1940s, artists started putting it in their artwork along with Algernon Blackwood's Wendigo story as an accompaniment, the artwork. And they started putting it, and it just caught on. Where today, if people tell me they believe they've encountered a Wendigo, almost always it has antlers to it. And again, I don't know if that's just wrong or the Wendigo has changed from what it was hundreds of years ago, that for some reason now it does have antlers. So that's a big one. The other big misconception is the mimicking of it, that today a lot of people contact me and say they heard their friend calling to them in the woods and their friend wasn't there or was way far away, and they believed it was the Wendigo mimicking their voice because they saw Supernatural television, the TV show Supernatural. They saw an episode where it said the Wendigo could mimic a human, and that's what they heard. But again, the early literature tells that if you heard the Wendigo, its voice was so eerie and terrifying that you would freeze in fear, literally freeze and stand there and not be able to move because you were so frightened, and that it could easily come and get you because it was so terrifying. So those would be the two big ones. And then, of course, people conflate it or misidentify it quite a bit with skinwalkers, thinking that they're the same exact thing when they probably couldn't be further from each other.
In your research, how often did the Wendigo appear as a cautionary tale rather than a literal creature?
Yeah, you can find a lot of these stories, these allegories, where it's meant to be a caution against consumerism, of consumption, or warning people not to consume human flesh, to resort to cannibalism, that once you eat human flesh, you can't come back from being a Wendigo. The only option out is death. And there were a lot of those cases, but we focused mainly on stories where it didn't seem to be a metaphor or an allegory at all, that it was literally thought to be a creature or spirit being out there, that it wasn't meant to, share among the town or the village or the tribe, or, using limited resources. It was a deadly predator out on the prowl.
What role do hunger, winter isolation, survival play in shaping Wendigo stories?
Yes. So the Wendigo is an northern cold-based creature. Even though people could see it in the summertime, these were always in cold climates. That we don't have stories of the Wendigo in Florida or Mexico or warm places. It was always the embodiment of ice, the embodiment of cold, starvation, suffering. That seemed to be very important to the entire Wendigo folklore. That, as I said, it was during these times when starvation was a real concern for people throughout the Midwest and Canada, that, game wasn't guaranteed, and often big communities would split up to spread out because it would be easier to sustain 5 or 10 people in your winter quarters than 200 people all together. Just not enough game and food in that area. So they would spread out. And that's when the Wendigo, I think, found people at their weakest and most vulnerable during that cold spell. And once food was flourishing, then you had to deal less with the Wendigo. But there was something about that the hardship of slowly starving or being hungry the entire time.
Yeah. Do you think labeling it as a mental illness changed how the stories were taken seriously or dismissed?
So one of the things Kevin Nelson and I did when we started the book, being two Caucasian men writing about a First Nation legend, was to take it very seriously, and that in the book, we describe that for years and generations, researchers, scholars, sociologists, historians, they would look at these early reports of the Wendigo where they claimed to find ice. They cut open a suspected Wendigo and found its heart encased in ice, or someone was turning into a Wendigo and they found ice down their backbone. And too many times what we called white-splained it, that they said, well, there must be some explanation. These people, they just didn't know any better. We know more today with science and medicine, and we're much more educated, that these quote unquote primitive people must have been mistaken. And we often didn't follow that route at all. And that was the same with them calling it a mental illness, that Wendigo psychosis, which isn't in the DSM as a mental illness, but it's more of a culture-born syndrome where, it's contained to one culture and it's a symptom of that. And we avoided that altogether. We took these stories at face value, that if these people claimed that they had cut someone open and there was ice on their heart, how are we to say, no, it wasn't ice, that it was a mental illness? Looking back on it hundreds of years later, it's too easy to white-splain it. So we took these things at face value unless there was a reason not to. So I think the idea of saying these people just had Wendigo psychosis and, had a mental illness that made them crave human flesh, and we never bought into that. Also, many people believed that it was a means of clearing out the community of those who did not contribute, that once you got to a certain age, or maybe you were not as active as you once were, you became a drag on the community. You'd often take more resources than you contributed. And many cultures, Western cultures, blamed the indigenous people, that they would kill these people and then claim that they were a Wendigo so that they wouldn't feel as bad about culling their own people. And I found that to be the exact opposite, that when someone was turning into a Wendigo, and let me quickly explain, when somebody was thought to be possessed by the Wendigo, they had a lot of changes physically and mentally, where all of a sudden they felt very withdrawn from the community or the tribe. They might get very aggressive. They might claim that they no longer see their friends and family as loved ones, but as tasty game animals that they wanted to eat, and they wanted to consume them. And oftentimes we found that people went way out of their way to try to cure these people using their best medicine, their best shamans, the best things they had to cure these people for sometimes weeks and months on end, until the person got so violent that they had no choice but to kill them. So it wasn't done out of hatred or revenge. It was done in a loving hand. Oftentimes, it was up to a family member to kill the suspected Wendigo, because there'd be less likely of a chance that it was done for, petty revenge or greed or jealousy or something like that.
Have you ever been out yourself in some strange place and thought, and got that feeling as though you've been watched and a bit frightened?
Yes, certainly, especially when dealing with Wendigo stories. When I'm from the North Woods of Wisconsin, and we have some beautiful forested areas up here in the Northwood, just gorgeous tracts of forest and land, but nothing compares you to what it's like in Canada, that they take the Northwoods and expand it. They really know how to do it well. So when you're out in these desolate places in modern day times, and you think back to what it was like 200 years prior, I mean, you don't need a vivid imagination to see how hard life would have been, and that help was nowhere to be found. You weren't stopping at your local convenience store and grabbing food on a hike. And those are when the bone chillingness of it settle in, that these would have been really dark, cold, terrible places to survive a winter. And then especially when the sun goes down, you have to worry about monsters and creatures coming after you. It would have been a trying time. Yeah. So I often, on my expeditions to look and research for the Wendigo, I had my hatchet real close to me and I was looking over my shoulder many, many times.
I bet you are aware. Were there historical cases that genuinely disturbed you while researching this book?
Oh, quite a bit. Now, in my previous years of research on other supernatural phenomena, I've done books on serial killers and mobsters that kill people and untimely deaths, suicides, fatal accidents. So I thought I was pretty immune to this kind of stuff, that I could handle it. But
Yeah.
there was one occasion I was in Alberta, Canada, looking at this, trying to find the winter quarters for a Cree gentleman called Swift Runner. He was a Cree indigenous man of about 40 winters of age, just north of Edmonton, Alberta. And he actually ended up going Wendigo, or turning into a Wendigo, and ended up killing and eating his entire family, including his wife and their 6 children. And I was standing where we thought his winter quarters would have been. And this was 1878 to 1879 when he did this. So quite a period ago. But
Yeah.
I was just chilled there because he killed one by one his children until the only survivor was his last living son. And his son had to have known he was going to be next, but there was nothing he could do because it was middle of winter, spring was just coming, and the kid was starving along with Swift Runner. And, it sent cold chills down my spine just thinking of the horror that kid must have felt, knowing that his father, his one protector in the world, was going to be after him, a predator, in the next day or two. And, I still, when the cold chill runs through Wisconsin here, I'm often transported back to that location. And it's just frightening. I didn't think it would have as big of an impact emotionally, the wallop, as it did. That it was a pretty moving thing to be there. And it's something I don't think I'll ever forget, of just knowing the horror that was caused by someone believing they were a Wendigo.
That's so strange, that. What does the Wendigo symbolize in today's world? Greed, consumption, isolation, or something else?
I think it can symbolize all those things. It can also symbolize our fear of the unknown. It could also symbolize our destruction of the planet or the forests. So it could symbolize all those things and many, many more. Of one idea that ties it to consumption is that no matter how much the Wendigo consumed of human flesh, it was always possessing a insatiable hunger for more. Similar to us in the Western world, no matter how many things we consume, how many goods and products and knickknacks, that it's never enough to make us happy, that we're always searching to fill that void. So a lot of people cling to that symbolism, that modern day, maybe the Wendigo's not running around, but yet here we are with, people consuming money as well. Billionaires and millionaires, getting all this money. So a lot of people look at it from that angle and that lens. But again, I tend to think of it more as the monster itself, that these things were thought to be feared, and any dog that would roam into an establishment, especially at night, if no one knew the dog, it was thought that it was either the Wendigo shape-shifting or a spy for the Wendigo. So you were to treat any stranger, both human and animal species, as suspect, because you didn't know if they were the Wendigo coming, especially when they were traveling at night or if it was an owl or a dog, and no one was safe from becoming a Wendigo. There are legends of men and women becoming Wendigos. We have a couple stories of children and infants turning Wendigo, even a story of a dog turning Wendigo and turning to cannibalism and then being shot, and it still didn't die. It kept coming back. So I think that's the fear, is that no one was safe. That, you know, you'd think if you're not in Ireland, maybe a banshee's not going to get you, even though there are reports of it around the world. But, or that if you're not out in the ocean, a shark's not going to get you if you're not in the ocean. But with the Wendigo, there's nowhere to be safe. No one was safe from it. People were terrified, and I think that's one of the more fascinating parts of the legend for me.
It's funny you're saying that, because we had Andrew Collins at once on top of the cliffs. Just before, 2 weeks before that, they said there were an air what used to run. It looked as though it was going to greet us every time me and Paul went up there. It kept running towards us. I thought, why is it running towards us? I just couldn't, but I thought there's either something wrong with it, that's why it's running towards us, and then it would run off again. I said to Paul, that's strange, you know that. You don't get an air like that do it, or a rabbit would do that. They'd run away from you. Yeah. And then Andrew came up once, and he was being interviewed, and we said, look at that, Andrew, coming towards you. Went, oh my God, what is that? And he called it an unusual name. And I thought, well, that was Andrew. I knew what Andrew was going to say. And I thought, God. And I suppose he said, and then it used to come up every night. We'd see it, and then it just disappeared, completely gone. So I don't know if it was Paul itself or not, or it just vanished.
Yeah, I love stories like that.
We wonder what it was.
Mm-hmm.
Because when it first came, it seemed to be playing with a blackbird. Believe it or not, this blackbird was on a pole, and it came down, and they seemed to be, well, not fighting each other, but trying to get each other. And then blackbird flew off, and that started to run towards Paul. Went, what the hell is that?
Mm-hmm.
Strange, isn't it? So this day, we still don't know what was it.
Mm-hmm.
Was it something else?
Yeah, you really get into the trickster component of it. That almost as though something's playing games or having fun with you while you're there. That whole cosmic trickster that seems to be a component of a lot of these different phenomenon. So yeah, that's puzzling. And as you and I were talking before the show, that, you know, especially when it comes to the Wendigo, I've researched it for quite a few years now, several decades, and I still feel like I don't know anything about it. That the legend is so big and broad and complex and puzzling that I feel like I could do this till the end of my days, knock on wood, and that I still wouldn't know the whole legend of it. It's just that odd.
Yeah, there's a question here from Steph. Hiya, Chad. Have you or any of your colleagues ever felt the need to bring protection or psychic or religion into the field? Thank you.
Great question. Well, it depends. Like when I've been on my Wendigo expeditions, one thing that was thought to either cure a Wendigo, someone turning into one, or that could kill it, was hot tallow. And tallow is an animal fat. And it was said that if you poured hot tallow down its throat, it would defrost its icy heart and it would die. And I don't know how you're supposed to pour it down its throat, but we had tallow hot the entire expeditions because just in case. And that with the one Wendigo legend up in northern Minnesota was an island, Star Island, and there's a lake called Wendigo Lake in the island. And we winter camped there in like 20, 25 below zero Fahrenheit weather. And in fact, we had tallow with us, but my colleague, Kevin Nelson, he was actively trying to conjure the Wendigo forward, where he was fasting for several days before we left so that he would be very hungry out on the island, and hopes that it would come, make it come forward. And we've had other occasions where we've tried to conjure up things as well, but I never really was one that would use protection when looking for ghosts or spirits. I wasn't saging or salting or saying prayers or wearing any medallions, anything of that nature, because I was actively looking for these things. I was trying to sort fact from fiction. So I know a lot of people do. A lot of my colleagues will protect themselves and the like, but I was more freewheeling, if you will. And when it came to like Wendigo and other creatures, we were actively trying to entice it. And thankfully, I'm still here today.
I know Joe's in the chat room said Stephen and witches are linked to heirs, shape-shifting to steal and cause mischief. So the legend goes.
Yeah, shape-shifting is a big part of the paranormal, but also with the Wendigo, that again, owls were thought to be very suspect, that they were spying on you and that the Wendigo could change form. But it never really tried to pretend that it was a loved one or a family friend or someone you knew, that it would just show up because it was thought to be all powerful, that it was said that it would only walk in straight lines because nothing could stop it. And that merely knowing that it was in the area, there were people who starved to death in their lodging because they heard a Wendigo was within the vicinity, and they didn't see it. They didn't know if it was really there, but they were so terrified, rather than go out to get food or hunt, they starved in their lodging. That's the fear that the Wendigo was able to put into the hearts and minds of the indigenous people, and then the French fur traders, the missionaries, the pioneers, the voyagers, every other culture that came into this legend, because the Wendigo will always be a First Nation legend, always an indigenous legend. But for several hundred years, it's been part of legend with the pioneers and every other type of person that I mentioned. So they've added their own legends into it. Like in the 1800s, some people believed the only way to kill a Wendigo was with a silver bullet. Obviously, bringing over werewolf legends from Europe. The European people brought that with them. So although it's an indigenous legend, other cultures have thrown in their beliefs as well.
Why do you think the Wendigo continues to resonate in modern horror and storytelling?
Several reasons. I think one, it's just so powerful that you can defeat it. You can kill it by many different means, whether you chop off its head or defrost its icy heart, or but whatever you do to kill it, you have to cremate it. Otherwise, its spirit will just come back into the woods and wait for the next victim and possess them and turn them into a Wendigo. But also the unknown and the uniqueness of it, that it's not like a Bigfoot sighting that happens all the time and people just see a weird hairy biped running about. This thing was so unique and bizarre and so fear-inducing that we have dozens and dozens of cases of people killing one another because they thought they were turning Wendigo. And in fact, many people that were turning into a Wendigo or felt they were, in their bouts of sanity, they would often beg to be killed. They would say, please kill me, because if not, I'm going to turn into a Wendigo and try to eat and kill all of you.
Oh my God.
Please put me out of my misery. So I think the uniqueness of it and the horror level of it being so scary are two things that make it so rich as a legend for the horror films. And I think in the next 5 years, you're going to see a lot more horror movies surrounding the Wendigo, as we have in the last few years too, that it's starting to get more acceptance.
What sources were hardest to track down while researching this book?
Oh, Now, I talk about this quite a bit from traveling the world, that there are many cultures on this planet that are hesitant to speak about their legends and their folklore. And it's not because they're rude or unfriendly, it's because they take it very seriously. Sometimes they're seen as sacred beliefs or sacred stories. So if you just reach out to people, cold call them or email them, you probably won't get a response. And that has happened to me numerous times, that it just doesn't work. But what I found is that if you talk to people in person, if you're traveling, researching these places, that people can get a sense that you're sincere, that you're respectful, and that you really are looking for knowledge on these subjects. And they're much more likely to open up to you, to tell you what they know, and that they're much friendlier in person. I mean, I'm not sharing any secrets here that people online aren't as friendly as they are in person, hiding behind their keyboard. But I think that's one thing that was very difficult, is trying to research while not being there. That once we went to these places, it was much easier to dig up stuff. And people might say, well, I don't know anything, but you need to talk to my aunt. She lives down the road. She has a story. Or I remember the local historical society published something about that years ago, and you'd go there and dig up those stories. But because of so much of the Wendigo legend was oral, that we feel like we missed a lot of it. That if we had been born 100, 150 years ago, we probably would know more about the Wendigo. That information's just died out because no one wrote it down. And, even up until the early 1900s, people weren't writing. They were focusing on surviving. If you're starving to death in the middle of winter, you're not grabbing a pencil and paper and scribbling down notes. You're trying to survive. So a lot of the early Wendigo stuff was lost to history.
Couple of questions here. I might change the subject a minute. Hiya, Chad. This is from Rebecca. I'm fascinated hearing about vampires. That's an area I know very little about. And the other one's from Jojo. Chad, have you had any close personal experiences with vampires?
Well, thankfully, none have come after me, knock on wood, but I've done a ton of research, including traveling to Transylvania, looking for legends of the vampire. And what I find fascinating around the world is that so many cultures believe that the vampire is not something that you should joke around about. It's not something where here in the US, we make movies about it sparkling in the sunlight. But to them, it was a vicious, hideous creature, that it wasn't a supermodel like we think of them in America. They were, hideous corpse-like creatures that would often rise up out of the death, and they would be covered in soil and dressed in their burial the gowns, and still have that smell of death on them, that oftentimes they couldn't speak, or that they weren't very intelligent. They seemed to be just mindless ghoul type creatures. And over the generations, that has changed in America, especially, where now they're very sophisticated, elegant creatures that love playing classical music when they're not out hunting for human blood. But many cultures, they would take great pains to make sure you wouldn't come back as a vampire, whether it was, chopping off your head and burying it separately from the body, or burying the body face down. So if the person awoke, they would start digging and dig their way deeper rather than up to the surface. Or we're finding more and more ancient graves and burials where a brick was placed in the mouth of the deceased so that they couldn't come back as a vampire, or that you'd put a cross or a little crucifix on their face or their chin when you buried them. So many cultures take this very seriously, much more than we do here in America.
They did do in London many, many years ago, Victorian times. They did it in, I can't remember the place now in London, a cemetery down there where it happened quite a few times. And a bloke got accused of digging a vampire up. And he got sent
Yes.
down for it as well at the Old Bailey. And he
Yeah,
managed
we
to
have
get out of
stories here in
prison because he went
America
on
as
hunger
well.
strike. Sorry?
Oh, no, go ahead. I love this.
And he managed to, he got sent down for, I can't remember, 3 years, something like that. And he went on hunger strike. Anyway, they let him free in the finish. And he got accused. Highgate Cemetery in London. That were it. Johnny should just put it up there. Apparently, there's a vampire in Highgate Cemetery in London. There you go.
Yes.
And the guy who I interviewed on my show all them years ago, he told me this story about it, how he got locked up. He got tried at the Old Bailey, and it was in all the morning papers about him being a vampire, because they said, police say, he dug a body up and it was a vampire. And unfortunately, the guy has died since, and I've got loads of papers on him at all. I'll have to send them you.
Yeah, I love that legend. And most people try to avoid these things. So trying to dig one up to resurrect one is very interesting. There was a case in the early 1900s in Winona, Minnesota, here in the States, where a man's family, all of his kids were dying year after year after year. And finally, they lived in a very superstitious neighborhood of immigrants. And finally, the neighbor said, well, your family's dying because your first child that died, his young daughter, she's a vampire now, or a death siren coming back to entice her siblings to join her in death. And they said, you have to go out there and dig up your daughter, who had been dead for about 6 years at that time. You have to dig her up and cut her head off from the rest of her body and then rebury her. And he went out there and dug up his daughter and realized she was nothing more than a mere skeleton. So he thought, there's no way she's a vampire. So he reburied her, and his last son was still sick. So he thought, maybe I screwed up. Maybe it was my first son who died, who's the vampire. So he went out and dug up his first son the next night, and same thing, nothing but skeleton. So he went back thinking he broke the curse, that it was done. And of course, it was all for naught, because his last son did die of the illness, and the police arrested him. But at that time, there were no laws on the books about digging up bodies, that you could dig up as many bodies as you wanted. As long as you didn't molest them or harm them, you were free to do so. And don't try that now. The laws have changed in Minnesota, but at that time, he wasn't charged because he hadn't desecrated the bodies. All they found on the woman, his daughter, was the cross they had placed on her chin when she was buried. That was still there, protecting them from her rising up. But yeah, we still get reports of vampires here in the U.S. as well.
Stefan's in chat room. She says, always bury a vampire at crossroads.
Yeah, so in America, at least, the version of a crossroads was, if you ever wanted to sell your soul to the devil, the deed would have to be done at a crossroads. That's where the bargain would be completed. And there's a lot of folklore that if you go out to the crossroads on Christmas at midnight on Christmas, you will hear the names of those who are going to die on the wind in the following year. The wind will bring in their names. Or if that you go out there on midnight on New Year's Eve, that you will see people that are going to die, and that whatever troubles you the most will appear at a crossroads. So whatever's going to bother you in the new year, that will show up at a crossroads. And there are stories of hellhounds patrolling crossroads, and they truly are a magical place. And you've heard of people being buried there, much like if you weren't to be buried inside the cemetery proper, if for whatever reason they wouldn't allow you inside of a consecrated ground, often you'd be born at a crossroads. Not only that's the only place, but also to protect people from you, that you couldn't rise up and come back. It's like being buried on the other side of running water that you couldn't cross back over, or when they put an iron bar on your casket. So with the belief that spirits couldn't pass through iron, so you'd be protected, or you'd take several routes home walking back from the funeral so the spirits wouldn't follow you, or maybe you'd paint your house a different color. So if they did come back, they wouldn't recognize it as your house and they might terrorize your neighbors instead of you.
Do you think perception has changed over the years then? About
Certainly,
vampires?
I think with all the paranormal, when I first started lecturing on these topics, 30 years ago, after a lecture, someone would come up to me and say, they'd look around and make sure no one was listening. And they'd say, well, this is what happened to me. And now do a lecture and 20 people raise their hand willing to share the story right away. So I think it's become more accepted. I don't want to say it's become more popular, because I think belief in the paranormal has always been popular. You talk to seniors who tell of their grandparents telling them stories around the fire, tales of the old worlds or the old countries or the legends that they grew up with. And one thing I'm fascinated with is how these stories morph and progress. That I'll go to a town that has a legend and I'll talk to teenagers and they'll tell me a version of that legend. And then you talk to seniors, people who have been there for decades, and usually they have a completely different version of that same legend. It's just changed like a game of telephone over the years. So that's fascinating to me too.
Did when we go back to Wendigo, did this research change how you personally view folklore or human behavior?
It really did. And the fact that early on, when I first started getting into this field, I thought it was going to be easy to solve some of these things, to figure out what was going on. And when that didn't happen to me personally, I switched early on to not just trying to prove or disprove these things, but look at the bigger picture of what they mean to us as humans, what they mean to us as a society. Why are they important? Why are these rites of passage or tests of bravery important? More so than whether or not they actually happen. So I think that curiosity has kept me going for all these years, because many people who started out when I did, they got bored or bothered by it because sometimes nothing would happen to them. And if they were going there expecting to solve these things, sometimes it was a letdown for them. So I shifted early on to look at these things as the adventure of it. And I was just writing, I'm doing some research on mermaids in some of the lakes here in the US. And I was just writing how that even though they seem to be a relic from a bygone belief system, that as long as we exist, mermaids will exist, because they are an extension of humans. They represent our desires, our fears, our goals, our regrets. As long as we're here, these legends will be here as well.
What's the most unexpected reaction you have gotten from readers of the book?
Twofold. One would be people not knowing how much was out there and how many of these stories took place. They thought maybe it was a handful of people killing one another, but it turned out to be dozens, if not hundreds or more. So the extent of it was a big shock for people. But also, I was really surprised at how many people will not even talk about it still to this day. Many cultures fear even saying the name Wendigo is enough to put you on the radar. I always say that when you go looking for the weird comes looking for you. And I have a couple great stories. I was in the Northwoods of Minnesota, up by Bemidji, Minnesota, by the reservation. I was going to do a lecture on mysterious creatures of Minnesota, sea serpents, Bigfoot, you name it. And before the lecture, some elders from the local tribe came up to me and said, "We heard you're going to be talking about a local legend." They didn't say which one, And they said, we'd appreciate it if you would not mention it at all. Don't
Oh,
talk about it. Don't allude to it. Nothing. And I said, of course, I'm a guest here. Don't worry. It's completely out of the program. Fine. And those words had no sooner left my mouth than I could see their body language soften. They relaxed. They were terrified that I was going to mention these stories, which they believed that it would bring these creatures to them.
yeah.
And the other story I have is I was up again in northern Minnesota by the Canadian border doing a lecture. And after the program, a woman of non-Indigenous descent came up to me and said, we grew up by the Canadian border, and my father always told me and my friends while we were playing that if we ever heard the kettle or a cauldron or anything being struck in the woods, we needed to get home right away because that was the Wendigo coming for us. And she said, I never did hear the kettle being struck, but it stuck with me all these years later. And she was in her 80s telling me the story that she remembered as a kid about the Wendigo. And that's the fear people had about this legend.
Fear, isn't it? That's frightening.
Yeah, very scary.
Young children to think about that, thinking, God, I'm not going in there. Oh no, that sound, have you heard? Or whatever. It must be terrifying for them.
It is. And think about when a kid is fearful of, let's say, an intruder, they know that their mother or father is there to protect them. They might have a baseball bat or whatever. But when a werewolf's coming for you, you know, it might not do much good to have a tennis racket or a baseball bat. So there is no protection. So there's that fear that, you know, these things are otherworldly. I would much rather deal with a deranged neighbor trying to break into your house than, you know, the Wendigo trying to come after you.
Oh, God. If the Wendigo were to appear today, where do you think it would thrive and why?
I think it would thrive in the Canadian wilderness because there's so much of it that most of it's, you know, practically undisturbed. It's unknown that it could, if it is flesh and blood, like a bear or a moose, like out of all the creatures, I'm probably least likely to believe that the Wendigo is a flesh and blood creature that's here 24 hours a day, year long, like every other known species. I think there's something other to it, that it's not here in the same way we think of as a beaver being here, that I don't know where it comes from or what it, if it's dimensional or time travel, whatever it is. I don't think that it's, you know, here all the time. So I think it would reside in these places where it could remain hidden or undetected. But I just recently, not too long ago, had a story out of a relatively bigger city, Spooner, Wisconsin, at a summer camp. Two brothers thought they encountered the Wendigo, and this wasn't some far remote place that you had to go hours to get to. It was 30 minutes outside of a town. So I think maybe, you know, maybe people being surrounded by neighbors and other people might not be as comforting as we think.
Where do you think these creatures come from then? Do you think they're interdimensional? Portals open up? Are they come from ley lines or anything like that?
I've given this topic a lot of thought over the last couple decades, and I'm starting to lean to the idea that where they come from, what they are, that maybe I'm not even asking the right questions, much less getting the answers. I think it could be all the above of you mentioned, or none of the above. It could be weirder than we ever imagined, or that we could even comprehend. But I don't think there's a, you know, a pod or a group of Wendigo living out there, and you could discover them if you happen to, you know, just stumble across their territory, if you will. I think that there's something weirder to it. Again, I don't know if they're, you know, interdimensional or ultra terrestrial or what you want to label it, but I definitely think that it's probably as weird as we can imagine.
Do you think they're attached to us through consciousness? Like some people can see them, some people can't see them.
Certainly. And I don't think that just pertains to the Wendigo, that I'll have people that are in a car together, 4 people, and they'll encounter a UFO and 2 of them or 3 of them or 1 of them can see it and the others can't. Or that years ago when I started researching this, I'll use the example of the UFO again, that if 4 people saw a UFO in a car, we would split them up and have them each write about what they remember separately, draw it, write down everything they could. And if those 4 matched each other, we thought that was a sign that it was more credible, that look, all these people saw the same exact thing. And what I'm discovering over the last couple decades is that's not often the case, that if you and I are in a car together, we might see something and perceive it completely different. You might see it as a werewolf with light gray fur, and for me, it has dark, matted down black fur, and it looks thinner than it looks to you. And that human perception, I don't know if we're seeing it differently, or maybe they're projecting themselves differently to us. Again, I don't know. I'm just speculating and theorizing here. Yeah. But I do think that people perceive these things much different than someone else. Lake monsters as well. We have several lakes here in the US where people see either a long serpent-like creature, 30 feet long, 12-inch diameter, more like a long snail or an eel. And then others see a more traditional Loch Ness monster, plesiosaur type with the long neck and the humps.
Yeah.
And the odds that there'd be 2 sea serpents of different types in the same lake seems very low. So either these people are seeing it from different angles or it's projecting itself. I don't know, but it's fascinating when people are seeing something completely different than other people.
Oh, definitely. It always happens like that. You can say, can you see that orange light? It's kind of go, where?
Mm-hmm.
It's there right in front of me. I'm pointing at it. And they go, no, I can't see it.
Mm-hmm.
Strange, isn't it? How things like that happen. What do you hope readers take away from the Wendigo lore beyond fear?
I think they get some history and mystery tied in as well. And I hope that they come away thinking that the supernatural might be more bizarre than we could ever imagine, that here's a legend that has survived for hundreds and hundreds of years. And perhaps, if anything, it's now thriving as much as ever. That I think I hope they'll look into the deeper meaning of these legends and ask themselves why they're interested in these legends. What does it mean to them? That, here in America, nearly every non-Indigenous legend we have was brought over by immigrants. And they settled mainly by waterways. So a lot of our legends involve water here in America. And I think it's a good stepping stone to get involved in history, because I've had many times after a lecture I've given, I had, middle schoolers come up and say, we did our local history project on the alleged haunted house in town. And, we didn't find any ghost stuff, but we dug up the whole history of the house that nobody knew about, who lived there, who died there, the exact history. Some people get involved with the architecture. They get excited about visiting older buildings because of the haunted legend or the supernatural folklore surrounding it. So I think investigating and researching the paranormal can be a gateway for many different other interests. And for me, again, it's more of the adventure of getting out there, exploring, hitting the back roads, and looking for the unknown.
Like you say, in America and Canada, you've got some strong places to go there. These woods or forests you've got up there stretch for thousands of miles.
I think people in other countries can't really grasp the size of not only America, but Canada as well. And that, you in Canada, you can drive for hours and not run into anything. No gas station, no house, no other people. It truly is a frightening place out there. And I love that wild, and it's shrinking every year as humans take over more and more of the land on Earth. But there's still these pockets of undeveloped, undisturbed land where anything seems possible.
And I'm sure it will carry on providing strange anomalies and lots of different creatures in the future as well. There might be some out there what we don't know about.
I firmly believe that we haven't discovered every creature or species out there. There was a really great X-Files, the TV show X-Files, that some of your listeners may remember, that was talking about, I think it was the Fluke Man who was this creation, but it was talking about how modern technology, our industrial waste, and all these other things were creating new species, new animals, new beings. So I'm excited to see what the next 50 years brings for us. Granted that I'll still be around, but I think these things are changing. And now we're starting to get some online legends like Slender Man and
Yes.
Dublin, Wisconsin, and the back rooms. All of these stories that exist online that are making their way into the real world. So I think that's going to be a key component moving forward too.
What's next for you, and any other legends or creatures calling your name?
Oh, so I just finished a book on supernatural Lake Superior that you can get from my website, and I'm now doing one on Lake Michigan here in the U.S. And I mean, there's stories of hellhounds and giant melon heads and the Lake Michigan Triangle, like the Bermuda Triangle, and all these great legends out there. And I'm really interested in those legends that are so far out, they tend to maybe fall into the urban legend category, like the melon heads, but I'm so fascinated by them. And so that's what I'm digging deep right now onto ghost ships and haunted lighthouses and you name it. It's like I'm running.
I'm going to say, what gets you aroused when you're looking into something? God, that's a great story. I must look into that.
Yes, it's a rabbit hole because you'll be looking for an old article about one legend and it'll mention something else that you never heard of. And you'll start digging into that. And the next thing you know, you're 4 paces away from where you were. But for me, there's nothing better than digging up an old 1800s article about a sea serpent that was spotted in a spot you were looking at.
I
love that.
Where do you find your information? Do you go to libraries?
Sure. I'm doing libraries, historical societies, talking with seniors, but also using the internet newspaper databases, both newspapers.com and newspaperarchives.com here in the US, and I believe in Europe as well, at least newspapers.com. But most libraries will have access to databases for archives of newspapers and old magazines and the like. But I do it all. I talk to people. I visit the historical societies and the libraries, and also try to find what I can in old books and texts too.
You're always busy then, aren't you?
Yeah, it's never ending because like I said, all of a sudden you're reading about one story and you come across something else. And to try to sort fact from fiction is really, it takes a deep dive for some of these stories. It's not just a matter of a day's research. Like the Wendigo was nearly 30 years of research for me. And some don't take that long at all. Some are, a few days.
Don't know, but Wendigo's a fascinating subject.
Yeah, certainly.
Isn't it? So where can people get your book?
Sure, it's available anywhere. Most people like Amazon, but my website, which is Chad Lewis Research, is if you want to tell me a story or drop me a line or ask a question or grab a book, you can do that as well.
So they can send you on a message as well on Facebook then.
Yeah, Facebook, email, Blue Sky I'm on, or travel to the weirdest legend you can think of, and I'll probably be there.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Absolutely top guest tonight, Steph says. Bob, thanks for Chad and his time. Janice is just saying, thank you, Chad and Bob. Rebecca just said the same as well. Thank you, Chad and Bob, for a great show.
Thank you all for watching.
Oh, yeah, I think it's always a great show when you're on. I've enjoyed it.
You make
tonight.
it too easy. Yeah, this is a fun conversation. Way too easy on my part. You're too good.
Oh my God. My guest on Friday is Jim Segalia. He used to be on, I'm going to say, Blind Frog, and he's been doing a lot of research. He's a scientist as well, Jim is. Skinwalker Ranch, he's been on there quite a few times on the shows as a guest appearance on there. He's going to talk about his research, so it should be a good show on Friday. That's the 3rd of April, 2 o'clock Eastern, 11 o'clock Pacific, and 7 p.m. in the UK. So thank you, Chad, for coming on the show. I won't leave it 2 years next time. When you get your next book out, how long it takes, I don't know. Get you back on again.
Thanks. Keep an eye out.
I will do. You take care and have a lovely afternoon wherever you are. And I'll catch up with you soon. Bye for now.